The Middle East, long a powder keg, was jolted on June 23, 2025, when Iran launched a direct missile strike on the US Al Udeid airbase in Qatar. This was no proxy attack. It was a bold retaliation for US airstrikes the previous day on Iran's nuclear facilities, including Fordow. The US justified its strikes as a move to halt Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran saw them as an act of war. The world watched as air raid sirens blared across the Gulf, and countries like Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, and Kuwait closed their airspace, halting a vital energy corridor. The region braced for chaos, knowing the next move could ignite a wider war. Into this tense atmosphere, world leaders spoke out, with alliances fracturing and calls for calm growing urgent. French President Emmanuel Macron, speaking from Oslo, emerged as a leading voice for de-escalation. Macron's message was more than condemnation. It was a plea to step back from the brink. He urged dialogue over destruction, reflecting France's belief that war is never inevitable. The world's attention shifted to whether diplomacy could prevail over the drumbeat of conflict. The stakes had never been higher. Iran's missile barrage on Al Udeid was both a show of force and a calculated warning. The base, a linchpin for US operations, was targeted to prove that no American asset in the region was untouchable. Despite the scale, there were no casualties, thanks to early warnings and joint US-Qatari air defenses intercepting the missiles. The attack's psychological impact was immense, signaling Iran's willingness to cross red lines while avoiding mass casualties. Airspace closures paralyzed global travel, and the world held its breath, fearing the next escalation. Iran restored some deterrence after the US strikes, while the US was forced to rely on its defenses. The incident exposed the region's fragile security and the risk of catastrophic miscalculation. One missile slipping through could have triggered all-out war. Both sides seemed to signal a desire to avoid that outcome, for now. The world waited, uncertain if this exchange was the end or just the beginning. The Gulf's uneasy calm was a warning. The margin for error had vanished. As the dust settled, President Macron delivered a forceful response from Oslo. He condemned Iran's missile strikes and expressed solidarity with Qatar, reaffirming France's alliances. But Macron's core message was a call for restraint, urging all parties to prioritize diplomacy over further violence. He warned that another round of retaliation would only deepen the crisis. Macron distinguished France's stance by questioning the legality of the US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, insisting that even shared goals must be pursued through legal diplomatic means. This nuanced position set France apart as a potential mediator. Macron's urgency was clear. The window for peaceful resolution was closing, but not yet shut. He reminded the world that military solutions in the Middle East have failed before. His intervention aimed to shift the conversation back to negotiation before events spiraled out of control. France's response is rooted in a doctrine that favors diplomacy and multilateralism over force. Macron's call for restraint reflects decades of French policy, championing dialogue, supporting the Iran nuclear deal, and hosting back-channel talks even after the US withdrew from the JCPOA. For France, the only path to sustainable peace is through structured negotiations, not military escalation. Macron's message: break the cycle of violence and return to the hard work of diplomacy. France's Middle East policy is a careful balancing act, allying with the US while maintaining strategic autonomy to engage with all sides, including Iran. Its deep economic and military ties to Qatar, a key energy supplier and host to the targeted US base, make the crisis personal for Paris. As a UN Security Council member and nuclear power, France sees itself as a guardian of international law. Macron's criticism of the US strike's legality, though risky, was consistent with this role. France's goal isn't to pick sides, but to prevent a catastrophic war. This approach risks alienating both Washington and Tehran, but France is willing to take that risk for the sake of stability. The diplomatic tightrope is fraught, but necessary. France's identity on the world stage is built on upholding multilateralism and legal norms. The stakes, regional stability, energy security, and global peace, demand nothing less. France's balancing act is its greatest diplomatic asset. The risks of US-Iran conflict extend far beyond the Gulf. A war could close the Strait of Hormuz, sending energy prices soaring and plunging Europe into crisis. Millions could be displaced, triggering a new refugee wave and straining Europe's unity. Instability would spill into fragile states like Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria, fueling terrorism and chaos. Macron's warnings reflect Europe's recent struggles with refugee crises and economic shocks. The international community, including Arab states and the UN, echoed France's call for restraint. Even Iran's rivals urged calm, underscoring the universal fear of uncontrollable escalation. The world knows no one wins if the region ignites. Macron's diplomatic strategy has broad support among French experts and security analysts. They see his approach as pragmatic. France can't dictate outcomes militarily, but it can mediate. By condemning Iran's attack and questioning US actions, Macron creates space for dialogue. The goal: offer both sides an off-ramp to de-escalate without losing face. France's strength lies in diplomacy, international law, and coalition building. Analysts agree, there's no military solution. Only patient, principled negotiation can prevent disaster. Macron's call for restraint is seen as the only logical path to protect French, European, and global interests. The consensus peace must be pursued, not just hoped for. The Iran-US crisis is just one flashpoint in a region riddled with conflict. As missiles flew over Qatar, a fragile Iran-Israel ceasefire was brokered after a bloody 12-day war. Macron's diplomacy had to address multiple crises, including condemning Israeli strikes that endangered French citizens. French foreign policy constantly juggles protecting its people and advocating for humanitarian principles amid chaos. The region's instability is fueled by overlapping conflicts: Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and the Iran-Saudi rivalry. France insists that diplomacy must be comprehensive, not piecemeal. The recent Iran-Israel ceasefire, though fragile, shows that dialogue is possible. France's persistent engagement is driven by the belief that even slim chances for peace must be seized. Only a broad diplomatic framework can address the region's tangled crises. France's response to the Gulf crisis is a reaffirmation of its belief in peace over war. Macron's urgent call for restraint is rooted in the conviction that negotiation is always better than conflict. The world stands on the edge of catastrophe, but France offers a bridge back to diplomacy. The choice is stark: continue down the path of escalation or return to the negotiating table. France is working to keep that door open. Peace is an active pursuit, requiring courage and wisdom from leaders on all sides. The window for peace remains open if we have the will to walk through it.